atheism anyways? According to dictionary.reference.com, atheism is the doctrine or belief that there is no God, disbelief in the existence of a supreme being or beings. According to Webster's Ninth New Collegiate Dictionary, which you may have at home as I do, atheism is a disbelief in the existence of deity, the doctrine that there is no deity. PhilosophyPages.com says that atheism is belief that God does not exist. Unlike the agnostic, who merely criticizes traditional arguments for the existence of a deity, the atheist must offer evidence. PhilosophyDictionary.org says that atheism is the denial of the existence of God. God does not exist. I think that going to philosophy dictionaries is probably a really good way to discover the meaning of atheism, since it's a very philosophically heavy, meaningful term. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, atheism means the negation of theism, the denial of the existence of God. These are all strong assertive themes. The University of Aberdeen's Glossary of Technical Terms also agrees and says that an atheist is someone who believes that there is no God. This doesn't seem like much of a debate, but what about some of the atheist websites? What do they say atheism is? On infidels.org, under the title What is Atheism?, it says atheism is characterized by an absence of belief in the existence of gods. At atheism.about.com, it is defined as not believing in any gods. These are very weak, very soft definitions of atheism. I wonder why.
Atheism. I don't think it means what you mean it to mean. Your words are confusing me when you put it that way. Why make it confusing when you can just say it plain? If you believe there is no God, just come out with a claim. Lack of belief in God makes your stance sound weak and lame. Atheism. You say that my baby's lacking a belief in God. Well, I can say the same thing about my lucky fishing rod. I don't need no big words to prove that concept wrong. So I thought I'd make fun of it, singing in this song. Atheism. Yeah. Philosophically, I think you may have missed that simply a lack of belief does not make an atheist. I'm not trying to make fun or suggest that we should hate. No way. Just want to keep some other folks from making that mistake. Atheism. Yeah.
You're listening to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Show, the show that's safe for the whole family. Unless your family contains professing atheists.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Atheist Experience. My name is Tim Hurd. I am the Bible Thumping Wingnut guy. And with me today, I have, as you can see, I have a couple guests with me today. Before I introduce them formally, let me say that this is brought to you live on August 26, 2018, here on the Bible Thumping Wingnut YouTube channel, and it is broadcasted at a later date on the Atheist Experience podcast feed. It's got its own podcast feed. Go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com and search for that link for just search the Atheist Experience on the iTunes or your podcast catcher. You will find it. So if you don't have time on a Sunday night, or you just stop in and you watch us for a few minutes, you can listen to the whole show later on YouTube or on the RSS feed. Bible Thumping Wingnut is Orthodox Christianity's marketplace of ideas. We have lots of different podcasts and blogs, and we agree on the essentials of the faith, and on some other issues we have healthy debates. You can also join the discussion on Facebook. Search Bible Thumping Wingnut. You can like our fan page, or you can join our discussion group where atheists are welcome until Len Pettis gets mad at them and kicks them out of the group.
What are you talking about? I'm not even in the group.
I know. Did you know? So Len Pettis of Grappling with Theology, he is here. You can check out he's one of the other 10 podcasts on the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network. You can check out his podcast. And Jason Mullet is here as well from Logical Belief Ministries. You can listen to all of Logical Belief Ministries podcasts. They are archived at BibleThumpingWingnut.com. He's taking a long break from podcasting, which is fine. He's taking care of some other things, more important things in his life. But you were here today, and the last time you were here, thousands of people listened and watched. Not live, but after the fact. It's one of the most listened to episodes. When you were here, all four of us were here. The three of us and what's our friend's name?
Dustin Seegers.
Dustin Seegers. Yeah, that was
very good. I wasn't aware of that.
I think you are the draw. I think you are definitely the draw. And your podcast is Logical Belief Ministries. So this evening we're going to, as we review the Atheist Experience clips, we're going to demonstrate for you the folly, or excuse me, the difference between logical belief versus logical unbelief. And Jason, the first thing I want to ask you to do is define logical unbelief.
Well, I think it's a contradiction of terms.
That's why I asked you.
I don't think there is such a thing as a logical unbelief. The problem is that the ground of unbelief or the system of unbelief doesn't provide the necessary foundation for us to even talk about things like logic. So somebody who embraces a worldview contrary to biblical Christianity is left in a conundrum, because he has to live his life as if the God of the Bible exists. He has to live in God's world, but yet he doesn't, because he has an axe to grind with God, as all of us by nature are when we were born. We have an axe to grind with God, and so we don't want to accept that God is the grounding to everything. It's not just particulars, but it's all things are necessarily grounded in the God of Scripture. And all theistic systems that exist outside of Christianity, take Islam, take Mormon polytheism, or any other form of theism that is contrary to Christianity. When you start looking at it, the God that they talk about does not provide that necessary foundation. And maybe we can get into that tonight, of how a Unitarian God, for example, does not provide the necessary grounds to morality and things like that. But so any form of unbelief is, by its very nature, undermining its own ability to have rational discussions about these things, and that's what we'll see tonight. I haven't seen what we're going to look at yet from Matt Delahunty and the Atheist Experience show, but I can already tell you, I heard one word already. Tim played a little clip from the show, and I heard them say should. I think it was talking about abortion. Should we be opposed to abortion? Well, right there is an inconsistency. The word should was used. Whenever an unbeliever, or in particular an atheist, uses should or ought, on what basis can they even use that word and apply it to anyone else? And so we'll talk about that.
All right, good stuff. And just to let you guys know, we are going to be we're going to be taking suggestions. We are reading the comment feed, and today we're going to, the Atheist Experience has thankfully taken each caller and made their own separate video for each caller, so you can see the titles of the topic, and for some of them you can see the name of the person who called and what city they came from. So if you would like us to review a specific video, you can suggest that in the comment thread. We're going to do individual calls, not whole shows, so to keep it under control. Len Pettis.
Yeah.
You know that guy who does our opening song?
Yeah.
Do you follow him on YouTube? He's gotten rather popular.
I don't. I mean, I'm aware of him. I know he's been on some other podcasts. I know he does apologetics with street epistemologists, probably in the last year or so. But yeah, I don't follow him. Why? What's going on with him?
He Len, turn down your output just a little bit, because you're so much different than Jason's level. He did a video evaluating Seitan Bruggenkate's How to Answer the Fool.
Okay.
And he is not presuppositionalist at all. And then within a week, Sai came on and they talked for 3 hours, I think.
That's good.
I haven't watched that yet, but I'm going to try to find a time to do that. I like that.
We could do a 7.5 hour review of their 3 hour conversation. That would be gripping.
That would be awesome. But it's always nice to see people who aren't afraid to go on other shows. And Sai's one of those guys, hey, if you disagree, I'll be glad to come on and talk to you about it. If you're reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Len Pettis, you get the first pick right here. Which video you would like?
I want the one you were playing when we were sound checking. About abortion. Abortion should be illegal.
Illegal.
It has 16,000 views.
This is from the Atheist Experience episode 22.33. I think that was last week, August 19th. Let me bring it up. And I will look for you guys to wave at me when you would like me to stop. So this is I guess it's a theist calling in, some form of theist calling in.
Nick wants to argue that abortion should be illegal. Hi, Nick. You're on with Tracy and John.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
What do you got for us?
Well, I think abortion should be illegal. I think all humans have the right to life, and parents have a duty to support those children until they're viable in someone else's hands.
Until they're viable, and then what happens?
Well, if they want to, I guess, give up their parental guardianship, they can to the state, but before then, I think.
What if the child is born not viable?
Hold on.
Duty?
Anything to derail the conversation is what she's doing, I think.
What if the child is born not viable? If the child was born, it's viable. Did she not understand the language and terminology? If the baby is born, it is definitionally viable. Now, what she's going to do is a fallacy called arbitrary redefinition, and she's going to start talking about birth defects, maybe Down syndrome and things of that nature. But be clear, she is redefining terminology if she indeed does that, and I suspect she is.
Well, I mean, I guess all I'm trying to say is if the parent can do some, I guess they have a natural, ordinary duty to keep that child alive until they can get it. Obviously, if they can't, they can't. But yeah, I think they have a duty to keep that child alive until they can give it to someone else.
Okay, so you would say then that if John has a child and that child is born not viable and it needs tissue organ donation from John, that he should be legally.
Yeah, they definitely should be defining viable.
Yeah,
right.
I think the word they're looking for really is dependent. Isn't that what they're talking about? I think that's what the caller is trying to talk about, is that the child is dependent upon its parents, and they're required to provide its needs until they can give it to somebody else who can provide those needs. I think that's what he's trying to say. I think he possibly used the wrong term, and they're running with it.
Really compelled to donate?
No, I think that would be an extraordinary thing.
Why?
Oh, because John's organs are meant for him.
Why would it be extraordinary? Because it almost never happens. That's why. Why would that be an extraordinary thing? Because it almost never happens that a parent has to. What organ does a parent have that's going to fit into its infant child? Can you name me one?
She's
Can
just
you name me one adult organ that's going to be transferred or organ? Yeah. What?
It's interesting. They always go to these scenarios which don't even really make any sense. It's kind of like whenever you talk to somebody about transgenderism, they start talking about hermaphrodites. Okay, as in like it's a fraction of a percentage of the population. And so the odd situation here, they just come up with these hypotheticals. They usually are meaningless and just derail. It's just a rabbit trail. It's a red herring. It's not. It doesn't really lend itself to the conversation on the objective value of human life. They're not even following that.
That's a great point, and I think that for the sake of argument, maybe the thing to do would be like, okay, let's concede that. Now, what about the 99.5% of elective abortions? Can we agree that those are murder?
Yeah.
You know, the abortion where it's like, oops, I got hammered. I wasn't smart enough to use protection. I'm a little easy, and so I got knocked up, and now I'm going to the abortion clinic. Can we agree that those 99.5% of elective abortions are murder? Can we agree to that? And if not, why not?
Yeah, they always go to the situation where, let's say, the mother's life is in danger or something like that. That's not what we're even talking about. Once again, it's just a red herring to derail the conversation. It doesn't really apply.
Why wouldn't the mother have the same? Why wouldn't the same apply to her?
Isn't her womb an organ that she has the right to?
All her organs, her lungs, her heart.
But it's meant for her offspring.
But what now?
What's the difference?
What about it?
The womb is meant for her offspring.
But you're saying that you don't care whether she consents or not. Like her consent is irrelevant. That she should be forced to gestate whether she wants to or not. Is that correct?
Len,
what about the consent of the baby? Does the baby get to consent to its murder? Okay.
I would go. I would say to her, why do we need the mother's consent for anything? Why can't we just take the mother's life? I mean, what's consent got to do with it? And what would make me doing that immoral? If you can kill the baby. And
honestly, from an atheist perspective, why is murder even of an adult person wrong?
Right.
I mean, how do they object to it at some point along the growth period? I know they object and they say murder's wrong once the child is born. That's probably these people's position. But how do they even hold to that from the atheist position? I don't understand. I know it's their opinion, but everyone has opinions about everything, and I could really care less what your opinion is. I want to know what's objectively true.
I mean, I guess you could phrase it like that. I mean, could I give an analogy?
Well, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. I don't know if an analogy is necessary. I think I get what you're describing. I don't think I'm having trouble understanding you.
Yeah, but would it be all
right? I think. Go ahead.
Wait, let me ask before you do. Is this analogy going to compare a woman to an object?
No, absolutely not. It'll actually include the same people I'm talking about.
Okay, all right, that's cool.
So let's say that a woman is
right.
Say that again.
She acts like it's wrong to compare a woman to an object, but that's all a woman is. She's just reorganized stardust, right?
Absolutely.
What separates her from the rock by my driveway? I don't get that. I don't know why she assumes that it's wrong to objectify women.
Let's say she lives out in the country and she's pregnant and a storm hits and she can't get to the hospital and she was planning on going to go get formula somewhere. She can't get that either. She gives birth. Do you think that woman has any sort of legal obligation to breastfeed her newborn, or do you think that that newborn, she can just let that newborn starve because it doesn't have a right to her body?
Yeah, I think that once you have decided to have the child and you're having the child and you have the child, that you have adopted parental responsibility. Once the child is born, she is the legal mother. So
Hold on.
That was a
not
good
the scenario.
That was a good scenario. I'd never heard that before.
Here's what's good about it, because she's not addressing the issue. He said, like, look, he has, like, the consent of the woman was kind of taken away because he gave the storm scenario or something, right? She had to give birth to the baby because nature called. Like, you know, okay, so let's say it's okay. Let's change the analogy a little bit. The woman is on her way to the abortion clinic, and she goes into labor in the cab in her Uber, and the Uber driver helps her give birth because they're stuck in traffic and can't get to the abortion clinic, and she was going to murder that baby. Is she now obligated to breastfeed that child? Or can she let it starve? Okay, so she planned on killing the baby. The baby's out against her will. No consent. Now is she legally obligated, or should she be legally obligated to breastfeed the baby?
So the position of the baby is what determines whether it needs to be taken care of or not.
Its location is
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yes, she is obligated at that point.
So she would have to she would have to use her breast milk to.
Right. People that are parents under law have a requirement to not starve their children, but I don't see how this is relevant to a pregnancy.
Why does she assume that someone is only a parent after the child is born?
Right.
I don't. Why she assumes that? She seems to assume that parentology begins when the baby is out in the open air. If you keep it enclosed, are you still not a parent?
Right.
I don't get it.
To me, it seems more similar to pregnancy than the organ donation.
Well, no, because a person who's pregnant is not doesn't have any legal parental obligations. We have legal parental obligation once the child is born.
Right. So I'm arguing that we should change that law. Does that make sense? That we should give the unborn legal rights as well to that parental obligation.
So you're arguing that the state then should compel women to let somebody else use their body without their consent, that their consent is not required to use their bodies.
Hold on. Notice the inconsistency. Notice that after the child is born, the mother is obligated to use her body. She's just arbitrarily picking a point in the child's life and growth that now the mother becomes obligated.
And he's saying, let's change the law.
The argument both ways. She's speaking out of both sides of her mouth.
And he's just saying, let's change the law so that parenthood would be earlier.
So you just agreed to that in the breastfeeding example, didn't you?
No.
Wouldn't the state be compelling the woman to let that newborn use her body for breast milk?
No, what the state compels her to do is to not starve her child.
Right, but that by doing that, it's telling her that she has to give that child her breast milk, which is part of her body.
She's not starving the child. This isn't about her donating her kidney, all right? You're saying that she should be compelled to make donation of her body to someone who requires it because they're non-viable, whether she wants to or not. You would not make the father do this. You would just make the mother obligated.
Right. It's biology. I wouldn't say, I guess you can blame it on Mother Nature, whatever you want to say, but just like in the breastfeeding example, the father couldn't feed that baby. The mother has to.
Right, but if the father was there and the mother wasn't, and they had no access to to her, he would have to feed the child as well. So we were talking about equality there, where both parents would be equally obligated. But what you're arguing is that we should obligate women to donate their bodies, and that the state should compel them to donate their bodies.
How about we compel women to not have sex outside of marriage so this doesn't become an issue?
You're assuming that women in a marriage would never want to have an abortion.
Well, that's the sad truth too, actually.
Yeah.
I have never seen Tracy this emotional before. You hear that, like, she is really holding back. You can hear like her voice quivering. Like I've never seen her this emotional. I think she's very close to I don't want to say losing it, but this is an emotional issue for her. She's, I don't want to make any assumptions, but obviously she's a feminist, and this whole idea of, she's talking about equality for men and women, and this is the nonsense of egalitarianism right here, is to think that men and women are the same in every regard. Well, we see some physical ways that they're not. A man can't breastfeed his child. A man can't, pop a baby out of his private parts. There's some differences here that she absolutely refuses to acknowledge, because she is so married to the cancer of feminism that she can't divorce her reasoning from it. It's probably why she's about to come unhinged.
Yeah, and the caller has her in a kind of in a conundrum, because she's being inconsistent. On one side, she's arguing that the state shouldn't obligate a woman to use her body, but then on the other side, she's arguing that the state should argue that, or the state should make a woman use her body.
Right.
She's arguing for both sides. Just depends on the scenario.
Well, she has the law on her side, right?
But at Hitler,
we're here to argue about whether or not the law is right, objectively. And that's what the caller is pressing her on, and she's demonstrating her inconsistency in defending it.
I think it's not wise to argue with an atheist about abortion, because the caller is just conceding so much to the atheist. I mean, an atheist has never justified any action being right or wrong, and here we are debating abortion. How are we to make, be able to? This is like many steps down the road of the moral thought and moral debate, and an atheist shouldn't be included in that.
No, they don't have, as I mentioned before. I mean, they can't even talk about murder itself. So they're not even at the point to even have this. This discussion is only with somebody that has a worldview that can actually ground whether there are things objectively wrong.
Right.
She's not in that position at all. A Christian needs to challenge them on the fact that they're rebelling against God's law in toto from the start, not the nuances of how we apply, what is murder and what is not.
To help somebody who's non-viable become viable. But if the child is born non-viable and we require a body part from the father, or a donation, even a blood, you're saying even a pint of blood, this man should not be compelled to donate. But yet the mother has to donate her body, right? Her whole body is going to be used. She's going to have a person inserted into her uterus. It's going to be, there in her uterus.
Wrong. Stop. She did not unwillingly have a person put into her uterus. It was an act of volition on her part that put it there. This is the cancer of feminism blathering out of her ignorant mouth right now, that, oh, well, the government stuffed a baby in there and now wants to force her to have it. Give me a break. She's not even making sense. But you will make a husband donate a pint of blood? What husband wouldn't? Exactly. Okay, can we stop the whole idea that again, silly egalitarianism and egalitarian nonsense that the husband, there's this equality. First of all, you have this super rare scenario that you have to bring up, which the caller rightly debunked, and now she's bringing in these goofy scenarios. You won't make the husband donate an organ, as if such a thing were possible, an adult organ into a newborn baby. I don't know which one would. Maybe there is something. I don't know. But again, now do me a favor. Show me the husband that wouldn't, if asked medically. Your child needs a pint of blood to save its life.
Yeah, what father wouldn't, if his newborn child needed a kidney, wouldn't give it to him?
And I just wonder, I think that the untold tale of abortion is the men who would rather not have the women. How many fathers have had their babies killed who would have said, "I'll take the baby. You go along your merry way. I don't have to pay you child support. You give me the baby. We both win. You don't have the baby. I'll have it. Whatever." How many fathers are out there who are fathers of murdered babies because some woman went through an abortion to exercise her choice?
A year, and you're saying that this should be something required of her that she has no consent to and she does not have to agree to, and the state can force her to be used by another person, have her body violated in this way, put her life and health at risk, and that she should have no say in this whatsoever. But the minute that child is born, if it's still non-viable, the father has zero obligation.
Well, you just agreed that you'd be willing to, even if the mother did not consent to breastfeeding that child.
It's not about consent to breastfeeding. It's about consent to not starve it. That's the part you're not getting.
But is that child viable without the mother's breast milk?
Nobody's viable if they can't eat. That's the whole point. We're talking about the equity of a situation here. But what you're basically saying is that you should have to give your body to make something viable that's not, right? And that you should be compelled to do that, but only if you have a uterus. If you have a penis, you should not be so compelled.
What did she just say there? I was Googling something. What did she just say about men having a penis not being compelled to do what now?
I will rewind it a little bit. But
yeah,
what's missing from this is well-being. That's their argument. What's well-being? Can we think of the well-being of the person inside the mother?
I was going to say that I have a really easy standard for well-being. Not being murdered would be a really good start for well-being. Not murdering people would be a really good start.
And isn't this part of like the evolutionary process that they this is like the natural world. This is how we populate. These are natural things happening to that woman's body. She's like, the terms that she's using are just absurd.
She keeps referring to the baby as being something that's like shoved inside the woman.
I know, that's crazy.
Opposed to her will. As Len pointed out, this was something that she did of her own volition. This is not the way that she twists it around to try to, what she does is she tries to use emotional language to try to turn the audience around, but you have to catch her on that.
Right, and that you should be compelled to do that, but only if you have a uterus. If you have a penis, you should not be so compelled.
You didn't go back far enough.
She is mixing up his argument. He's trying to argue from their perspective and make them be consistent, and she's saying she thinks that the caller is saying the man shouldn't have to do this, but the woman should. She's totally I think she's got a disconnect there.
I don't think the caller's even making that argument.
Right.
And the question would also be is what is meant by using your body to support somebody who is dependent? I think is probably the word, like, once again, I think they should be using. The child is dependent. So my child, when he was born, he was dependent upon me to use my body to go to work, to provide shelter, clothing. My wife, provided other things with her body as well, but I did also with my body. And I'm obligated by God to do that for my offspring, for my children. And so both men and women are obligated to use their bodies to provide for their children.
Thank you, Peter, for the super chat. You guys can support us via super chat as Peter did, or you can go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com and click on support our ministry. Everything that you do is much appreciated. Thanks, Peter.
What I'm
okay, but is that child viable without the mother's breast milk?
Nobody's viable if they can't eat. That's the whole point. We're talking about the equity of a situation here. But what you're basically saying is that you should have to give your body to make something viable that's not, right? And that you should be compelled to do that, but only.
No child is viable without its parents. No child is viable without its mother. All right. And maybe again, it's the whole viability versus dependency thing. But a child will live hours if it's abandoned, if it's lucky. Right. So what is she talking about?
And
here?
then on the other hand, my nephew, who now is like 30 years old, he was born in 1987. He was 26 weeks old. He was in the womb. He was 26 weeks. My sister was 26 weeks along. And when he was born, he was just over a pound. And 1987, the doctors were able to, nurse him to live. He lived. So, I mean, being viable and, going to 9 months, and I mean, everybody, like you said, every baby that is born needs help. And it's amazing what babies will survive even today. I mean, the technology today compared to 1987, really, really premature babies can survive and become viable.
If you have a uterus, if you have a penis, you should not be so compelled.
But you're saying the same thing.
Len.
Can I remind her that every Supreme Court justice that made abortion legal had penises? Okay. Every Supreme Court justice, it was all penis-bearing people. And I don't want to assume anybody's genders, but it was all penis-wielding people on the Supreme Court that made abortion legal. I don't know if that makes Tracy feel any better as a feminist. Maybe, I don't know, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg had nothing to do with that decision. So just to make that, just to stir the feminist pot there a little bit.
With breast milk.
No, I'm not saying the same thing with breast milk. Okay. Neither parent can starve the child. Neither parent. If they can feed that child, they need to feed that child. They are obligated because they are parents, right? But we don't obligate people as legal parents. They do not have parental obligations prior to the birth of the child. They are not required. The father, for example, is not required to feed the child during pregnancy, right?
I still don't get how somebody from an atheist perspective can say that people ought to do this and they're obligated to do that. I don't get that. How does she do that?
By what standard? Yeah.
There's the idea that once the child is born, the biological parents, unless there's been other arrangements made, I know that we do have, but in general, the people that are the biological parents are usually considered to be parentally obligated, right? So if the mother needs financial...
If the Supreme Court rules tomorrow that abortion can happen up to 2 years old, will she still believe that?
Abortion up to 2 years old?
Yeah. Yeah, that you can kill a 2-year-old.
Okay.
Any 24 months and under, you can kill it. Will she still hold to that standard?
Yeah.
Like what is her moral grounding and framework? What is she built on here?
It seems to be grounded on it's usually considered. That's the language she used. It's usually considered. Okay, well, what if a group of people usually consider, as Len mentioned, that we can engage in infanticide up to 2 years old? She shouldn't have any objection to it if that's what's usually considered as right.
Right. And if the law is changed and abortion is made illegal, then that's the law.
I guess it's now usually considered to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
So that you support it.
In many Muslim countries, it's usually considered okay to genitally mutilate women.
Yeah,
that would be a
Is
good.
that okay?
Yeah.
In some Islamic countries, it's generally okay to throw homosexuals off of a roof to their death.
Yeah.
Would she think that that's okay? In the 1940s in Germany, it was generally okay to kill Jews and homosexuals and gypsies and the mentally infirmed. What is her grounding here? She's got her feet firmly planted in midair.
Yeah.
Goes for financial help, they'll tell her name the dad. And she has to give up the name of the dad, and then they'll go after the dad for that financial support because the state views these people as obligated once that child is born. Prior to the child's birth, nobody has this obligation. No one has it.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's not true.
Notice that's just circular, though.
So
No one has this obligation.
at
That-
nine,
that's assuming that her position is the correct obligation.
okay, my first granddaughter is about to be born, and so my daughter is like mid-September, so that's like she's 8.5 months pregnant. My daughter. Can somebody who's 8.5 months? You're saying that my daughter has no parental obligations? No parental obligations in the United States law. She cannot go and end that pregnancy today. Am I right or am I completely wrong? Are there places you can get 8.5 months?
I don't know. Maybe Len knows that better. There are some states at some point allowed partial birth abortions, but I don't know if that's legal.
Absolutely. I mean, George the Tiller Killer, right? Or George the Killer Tiller. He was very well known for that, as for it was Kermit Goswell.
Well, she's going by the law of the land. And I don't think if you're 9 months pregnant and
okay, but you cannot let the law define your morality.
That's why I'm
100 years ago.
But I'm going after her. I'm going after her logic.
But we have to hold her to her logical standard. We have
That's what I'm trying to do.
150 years ago, the law of the land was slavery being legal. So was it moral to own slaves in 1860? Tracy, yes or no?
Well, Len, we've evolved since then.
I'm not asking about since then. I'm asking you in 1860, the law of the land says this. Are you now an abolitionist, Tracy? Because you're going to be shoulder to shoulder with an awful lot of Christians who you hate.
Well, okay.
Nobody disagrees that already born people have a legal right to life. I don't think anybody.
Right.
Well, I have issues with right to life. I have some issues with right.
There's a lot of
Imagine
murderers
that.
that disagree with that. A lot of serial killers disagree with that.
Life.
Okay.
But because I'm not sure that anybody has it to the extent that we're talking about, right? Like nobody, I don't have a right to compel either of my parents to donate blood or tissue to me to save my life. And what you're basically saying is that if a child is born non-viable, the father should not be compelled to donate, even in ways that are severely less risky than what you want to force a woman to do, right? Or a person with a uterus. You want to take a person with a uterus and you want to make them put their life and health at risk to distort and change their body in ways, potentially.
It's interesting. She has to change the language today to a person, not a woman with a uterus, but a person with a uterus, because it could be somebody who identifies as a male.
Notice how pregnancy is distortion. I love this use of emotional language. A pregnancy is a distortion of a woman's body.
Mm-hmm.
Hell is not hot enough for this kind of thinking. I listen to her and I just feel like hell is the most reasonable thing I've ever heard.
Jason, I don't know if you can amp up your audio or not, or get more on top of your microphone. It is better when you're right on top of it.
Okay.
the risks are much greater with a birth than with an abortion. And so what you're basically saying is that she should be forced to allow someone else to use her body without her consent for reasons, because that's what you think.
Okay, but you would agree that there's not an absolute right to bodily autonomy, like in the breastfeeding example, we are in a way taking that woman.
You're confusing not starving the child with how the child is fed. The obligation is not how you feed it. It doesn't matter how you feed it as long as you're feeding it.
That distinction is completely arbitrary.
Yes.
Why is that the distinction? Why is that why at that point is the woman obligated to use her body, but in the actual development of the child in her body, that's not an obligation? Why? Why do you distinguish it right there? Why is it that you draw the line right there? It's completely an arbitrary line.
It is. You stole my thunder. It's interesting though. I lost my train of thought, but yeah, you caught the same thing I did. You just got to the mic faster. Good on you.
Okay.
She's not compelled to breastfeed.
It's a contrived example because you're artificially making that the only way to feed the baby, and then you're saying, well, we're making her do it in that case.
Right.
But in reality, what if she's not lactating? Who gets arrested?
No. I mean, things happen all the time where, all I'm trying to say is, in the same way, if I was trying to say a difference between an abortion and like a miscarriage, I don't think the woman should go to jail for miscarriage, but an abortion, she's actively trying to remove that, essentially kill the child, but I guess if you want to consider it like...
No, she's not trying to kill the child. She simply is saying that she does not consent to the gestation. You're saying that her...
Then don't consent to the sex, stupid!
There is
gestation is a natural result of copulation. Do not copulate. You will not gestate, you ignorant fool. Give me a break.
I've never heard this language before.
Oh, my word.
I do not. Wow.
Feminism is
consent about how her body is used is irrelevant.
The breastfeeding.
Oh my God.
And I'm saying
I don't know why you don't understand this. It's not, nobody's required to breastfeed. We're required to not starve our children. That is a whole different issue.
In my analogy, you are telling her to breastfeed.
I'm telling her not to starve the child, but you're confusing the idea of feeding a baby. You're confusing the idea of feeding a baby with allowing someone to violate someone else's body, right? We're talking about using her blood, tissue, organs, her entire body for almost a year. And you're saying that a person should not have any consent to do that. A person who births a baby has consented to this. Do you not understand the difference? She has consented to not starve that child. The woman who is...
sex has consented. That's the consent.
Right.
Not arbitrarily later, oh, now that the child is out in the open air, now you have consent. Once again, it's just an arbitrary line. They just like to draw it, and they're just arbitrarily drawing this line here and then trying to argue using different standards on either side of the line. On one side, they use the opposite standard to argue of why you shouldn't, and then on this side of the line, they argue with the opposite argument on why you should. That's just hypocrisy. That is what happens when anyone takes the position of God and inserts themselves into it and makes themselves the grounding and the basis for objective morality or anything. They become hypocrites because a creature, a person that is not infinite and doesn't have a nature to actually hold this stuff together, by necessity has to then be a hypocrite. And that's why you'll always see it in any secularist position when we start talking about morality, when we start talking about any of those type of topics, they're going to, by necessity, always be hypocritical, and they will use double standards. Has to happen because they don't have the ontos, they don't have the essence to actually hold together what they're trying to hold together.
Pregnant has not consented to anything. She's not even a parent yet.
Well, I would consider her a parent. I think you're.
I don't care how you would consider it. I'm saying that the law
Why
says
not?
that nobody.
Okay, I'm saying
Every other standard is arbitrary. Why is in her mind his standard is arbitrary? Everything she's put forth is, and she's like, I don't care what you think. I only care what people who agree with my twisted and depraved mind think.
Well, and she says that you're not consistent with the law, but he's here to talk about why that law is wrong.
Yes.
Right. And boy, would you like to hear her chime in on that argument when some of the atrocities that have happened in the past, which were legal, right?
Yes.
Love to her
pontificate for hours on that.
Love for her to say, I don't care what you think about then. It was the law, so it was right.
Think about before women's suffrage, right? Was that as her feminist position? Would she support it back then? Before women had the right to vote?
Yeah.
saying change the law. I'm saying change the law. The law doesn't.
Okay, so then would you say that so what is the obligation of biological, people with a penis when they are involved in creating that person? Are they now viable? So if the mother, let's say she has an accident, she needs blood and tissue, or she's going to lose the baby, do we reach out to the biological?
She's not answering that question.
Exactly. She can't.
Just jumping all over him, taking it in a totally different area.
Let me pull up another 1 in 6 bajillion scenario.
Father, say you now need to donate to keep her alive in order to keep the baby alive because you have this obligation that requires your body, and you have no right to not consent to this. Is that what you're saying?
No, because his body, none of his organs are meant for that mother or for that child.
You just finished saying that she should be obligated, right, to donate her body to keep the child alive, whether she consents or not, because she should have the same parental obligations to feed that child or to make sure that it doesn't, not let it die, basically, just like we would for a child who is at the hospital, right, that is birthed. But now I'm saying, well, then shouldn't the person who was donated the sperm, shouldn't that person be equally obligated in that? Why aren't they a parent? Why aren't they obligated as a parent?
Len,
I just want to point out the cheapening of the language of sex. Sperm donor, the person with the penis, the one
right.
with the uterus.
Yeah.
From a biblical worldview, sex is like super important, and it is theological. It is grounded in theology. I'm firmly convinced that that sex biblically is a picture of heaven, and I think anyone who's had it would kind of agree with me. But think of this. Okay, and I've given this scenario before. Jesus. When Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees and they talked about the woman who had 7 husbands, which one is going to be her husband in the kingdom? He said none of them. There is none married or given in marriage, right? Well, if there's none married or given in marriage, guess what? That means there's no sex in heaven. You know why? Because sex is a type and shadow of that, just like marriage is a type and shadow of the gospel. It is a picture of the gospel here on earth, and heaven is something that we get to in some way experience during sex. When time is consummated and we are in the kingdom, in the presence of God, we no longer need marriage because the type and shadow is gone. Just like the old covenant is gone, now we have the new covenant. We don't need those types and shadows anymore, right? We don't need the Sabbath, the tithing, and all of those things. Those were types and shadow. We don't need those anymore. Right? So we're not going to need sex. We're not going to need marriage because we are in the place of the presence of what is so much greater than those things. And the secularism cheapens it to biology, right? And when you cheapen something to biology, then it automatically has significantly less value. And that's how this depraved, wretched woman can sit there and justify murdering a baby and say, well, she has to give up 9 months of her life for this thing, because she couldn't control herself. And she happened to be ovulating when that happened. And so the sperm donor went to the uterus owner, and now they've copulated a baby, and she has to, I mean, give me a break. What is wrong with this woman? This is how atheism totally rots your mind and depraves everything into it's just biology. And again, if it's just biology, fine, then be consistent. There are no moral standards. Kill the mother, kill the father, kill the doctor, kill everybody. What difference does it make? You're a bag of stardust dancing to your DNA, and you're just doing what you are biologically, chemically determined to do anyways.
Email your sex questions to len@grapplingwiththeology.com. Len, you're going to start your own your new podcast about sex and heaven and
I'm gonna have to think about that one for a little bit.
Okay.
No, you don't have to elaborate.
Study it. I'm not gonna break it down anymore. I've run this past a few people I trust, and I've had it somewhat affirmed.
Write a book.
So I'm not putting a hard and fast thing on that, but you have to agree that in the marriage bed, in the Christian marriage bed, there is something deeply theological going on that God intended for us. Right? And that's why it's reserved for marriage, and it's not just a biological act done between a couple of evolved pieces of protoplasm.
You almost made Jason's covenantal head pop off with your new covenant.
Well, I didn't disagree with his type and shadows. I would agree with that. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously there is something deeply theological about sex. It is from what I would know in Scripture, it's an example of our union with Christ. It is marriage is an example of the union of the church with Christ. As Ephesians 1 and much of the New Testament talks about so intensely, Paul talks about us being in Christ and being united with him in his death, burial, and resurrection. And so in the same way, in the marriage relationship, a husband and wife are united in that way, in the sexual union. And I think that's a type of the union that exists with Christ and the church.
Well, I guess all I'm trying to say is the mother, at that point in pregnancy and both after pregnancy, in my analogy for breastfeeding, the only one that can keep that child viable is the mother. And I'm having a hard time seeing how you're differentiating my analogy from pregnancy, because they seem more similar. It seems like my analogy is better.
No, because your analogy is you're using an example where the woman has consented, and you're using another example where she has not consented.
No, all right. Let's say she didn't consent. Let's just take this to extreme case. She got raped, and the storm was all 9 months. She had plenty of food.
How about we just keep this in the realm of reality instead of your wild?
Why now? Why start?
Oh my word! Now finally, really?
You've been in fantasy land this entire phone call.
How does she know what's real, though? She's an atheist, right?
Thank you.
I don't think.
How does she know what's real?
There are 4 minutes and 20 seconds left in this call. I don't think he's going to convince her. So let us move on to another. We spent almost an hour on that. You guys all right with that?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I think we've, beaten that horse to death. My shoulder's a little sore.
All right, we have interpreting the Bible, arguments for the existence of God. This is from last week. Want to go there? Or Jason will choose. Interpreting the Bible, arguments for the existence of God, or disillusioned theist turned deist seeking answers.
Well, let's go to interpreting the Bible. It'd be interesting.
Interpreting the Bible for 500.
Here we go.
This is a 10-minute long clip.
Hello there.
Hello there.
Are you sleeping on a Nectar mattress or are you sleeping on a piece of garbage?
I don't think I'm sleeping on one of those. Okay.
Daniel in San Francisco, you want to argue about the existence of God. You believe the Bible should be read a certain way.
Oh, hello.
Hey, you're on with John and Tracy.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Dan.
So I'm a little nervous, so if I twist up my words or whatever, I'm really sorry. You can just ask for.
We'll try to be forgiving.
No worries. Yeah. So I have let's just say for the Bible itself of how to interpret it. When you go to the New Testament, right? You should be. I guess how I was taught. I guess is that you need to look at everything else in the Old Testament as kind of like getting ready for Jesus's return to pretty much stop all the sins that's happened in the past, like all the Old Testaments, like the genocide, the killing, the rape, I guess you could call it, and other stuff like that.
I'm out of my element when it comes to the Bible.
Because
an honest answer. I like that guy. That was a good answer. That would be a great clip. I'm out of my element when we talk about the Bible.
Because there's been a lot of people argue that the Bible doesn't really have like morals in it, or the morals are kind of contradictory, I guess, where there's a lot of genocide in the Old Testament and stuff like that. And I'm just trying to say that you can look at through Jesus' perspective, I guess, like through the lens of Jesus, I guess, and how his teachings are there to pretty much negate, I guess, the Old Testament's teaching.
But I thought Jesus was supportive of the law, though, right?
Here we go with the atheist informing the caller of what Scripture teaches. So the caller says, I don't know if people heard it. The caller said that Jesus negated what happened, the moral atrocities of the Old Testament.
Yeah, this is unfortunately what's common in modern evangelicalism is a decoupling of the Old Testament from the New Testament. It's kind of like just a new form of Marcionism or something like that. It's very common. Instead of actually looking at the Old Testament the way that Jesus looked at it and the way the apostles looked at it, really the term that he's using in the Old Testament of genocide is just a euphemism for judgment. Yes, God did judge nations in the Old Testament, and he used Israel as the means. And by the way, there is also another coming judgment. And so are you ready for that?
Preach it.
Yeah. There you go.
He lived a perfect life according to the law, and that was how he was able to act as a sacrifice. Isn't that correct?
Not a jot or tittle of the old law, whatever that quote is.
I mean, he thought the law was perfect, and his job was to live a perfect life under the law so that he could be a perfect sacrifice. Wasn't that the plan?
I guess, but I'm trying to. Man, I'm sorry. I'm just
That's okay.
I'm just really nervous. It's not something I really talk about a lot since I don't have a lot of
Okay, but let me just make sure. Are we on the same page as far as the idea was that man could not live?
They know they got one on the hook now, Len.
Yeah,
they've got one. I mean, they're 2 minutes into it, and they're gonna go for 8.5 more minutes. And
it's like when a boxer gets on a speed bag and all of a sudden they just find their rhythm and they just get it going. Like, that's what we're about to witness here.
One thing I was actually surprised by, though, is Tracy seems to actually properly represent Christ's mission when it comes to his active righteousness on our behalf. I was actually a little surprised by that. I've not usually seen an atheist properly represent that, but here she did.
Of a perfect life under the law. That man, it was.
But if another caller called in and made the argument that Jesus did this, she would argue against it. It's just when it's convenient, Matt Dillahunty gives a full gospel presentation. And when somebody else calls to talk about the gospel, he's, well, how does that work? How that doesn't make any sense. But what about this contradiction over here? And what about this? And we don't even know if he existed and all. It's so easy to be an ultimate skeptic. It doesn't take any training.
There's a flaw in men that they were imperfect, and so therefore they could not live up to the law. That's why they had to keep making sacrifices. So then Jesus was produced, and he comes out, and then he lives a perfect life under the perfect law, and now he can be the perfect sacrifice so that animal sacrifices are no longer required. Are we on the same page?
Yeah, we're on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I guess my question is that Jesus was basically making a statement, there's no problem with the law. The law is perfect. And if we were capable, the solution would be everyone to live a perfect life under the Old Testament law, right?
Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. All right.
I mean, does that make sense? Do you think that's...
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. And then I also have a question about hell itself, you know, and its statements within the Bible, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's never been any mention of hell in the Bible, so it's always a reference to God's punishment, which it seems that God's punishment is a total separation from God, pretty much.
Yeah.
And that is it's not just us going to like hell or whatever.
But it's not a happy thing, right? I mean, it's going to be pretty horrible, and it's going to be forever, right?
Yeah.
It's just not going to be flames.
Right.
Okay.
But it's not. But what I'm trying to say is that's not God trying to tell us, trying to like cut us from it. It's we're cutting ourselves from God.
Okay. Yeah. But we're sinning because we live in sin, and you know we were born in sin, and we just how do I say this? Okay, but wait. Here's a question.
To our temptations on our own will.
Here's a question for you. So, Daniel, if I am the entity, I'm going to create a universe, right? Let's say I'm a god. I'm going to create a universe. And I know everything. I am all powerful, and I'm loving, right? And I look at all the universes that I could create, and I see this one where I'm going to send Daniel, like by virtue of starting the universe in this particular way, I foresee that Daniel...
What is that? What version of Christianity is that?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out.
William Lane Craig's isn't that William Lane Craig's argument that God imagined like the best scenario that there could be? Len's just giggling. You're not even listening.
Sorry.
Sounds like she's been listening to some Molinism.
Yes, Molinism.
From San Francisco will end up in hell, whether it be flames or separation or whatever. I know that's going to happen before I create the universe, right? Because I know everything.
I don't think when he's omniscient, I don't think it means that he knows. I don't know how to explain. It's not that he knows what's going to happen like in the future. It's more like he just exists, right? So he's just, I don't know how to explain it. It's like,
okay, so you're saying he's not.
So don't call the show. Don't call the show.
Guys, dancing with open theism.
Right.
Sounds like.
Right.
Remember our conversation about hacks?
Yes, there are caller hacks. We've been
the hack caller.
Hey. This guy should not really become talking to anyone about Christian theology. He doesn't seem to have a good grounding. He needs to be listening to more sermons. Is what I could do. I could send him a list.
In your version of God, you don't accept that sort of future vision as part of what you're calling his knowledge.
It's just that he's like there, like he's just there, you know.
Okay. And so then he didn't know what would happen when he produced the universe.
Yeah, he produces it, and he had the morals that he gave to us, right?
Okay.
But he's still all powerful, but he doesn't know he's omnipotent in the fact. I don't explain. It's like
it's okay. No, it's all right. I get you. It's okay. I get you. My next thought would be, does he have any power over who is separated from him and who's not separated from him?
No.
Okay, so he's not
because we ourselves at the beginning we supposedly started with Adam and Eve when they ate from the tree of knowledge. They pretty much poisoned their own souls and were banished from.
Why does a Christian say supposedly? I don't. This guy isn't representing really any form of Christianity here.
And she has stopped filling in the blanks because she realized that there's more blanks than.
I just want to point out that Jason picked this call.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of regretting this.
All right, we'll listen to just another minute or so. See where it goes.
Sorry, man.
From whatever beautiful world that was there, heaven, pretty much. I'll just say it real simply, heaven.
Okay.
Because of
didn't he make that decision though?
They Adam and Eve were in heaven. He just said Adam and Eve were in heaven.
Mormonism, they were spirit babies sent here to see their earth.
Punish them.
Where's my train of thought? I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, John actually had a quick question for you.
Didn't God make that decision to banish them though? For doing that? Because they didn't banish themselves.
Well, I mean, he did banish us, but then after that, it was just our choices whether or not we wanted to become a part with him again, and wherever he is, which is supposedly an all good, great place.
Okay, so if you go out tonight and you go to a movie, and on your way back to your car, someone comes up to you and they put a gun to your head and they say, "Give me your wallet," and you refuse and they shoot you. Did you shoot yourself?
No.
But you knew if you didn't hand over your wallet, this guy was going to shoot you.
Yeah.
So if he shoots you, did you make the decision to be shot? Like, did you shoot yourself? No. Okay, so how is God different?
Wow. See.
Oh.
Do you understand our argument? Are you guys?
Well, okay, so basically she's saying, like, she's comparing the garden to a thief. A thief comes and says, take, give me all your money or I'm going to kill you. You refuse to give the money. He kills you. So in so doing, you killed yourself? Did you shoot yourself? That was her little analogy, right?
All right.
Well, that's okay. Okay, I get. Can I try to explain kind of what you're saying just for me to understand myself? Is that okay? So you're trying to say that, I guess, God. Holy cow! I'm trying to figure out how to.
Okay.
All right. Let's move on.
You see
what Len had next?
See the crowd in the background cheering.
Oh my goodness!
All right. What was the other one that you wanted, Len? Was the
I was looking at one that says, and this is a Matt Dillahunty video. It says, "Atheists are immoral. Explain why I'm wrong." From 1 week ago.
Yeah,
down
that would be really. That one caught my eye too. Last week when I reviewed it.
Well, I didn't review it, Tim, and neither did Jason.
And you didn't listen to the podcast either. Actually, it hasn't been posted on the RSS feed, but
that's your fault.
Oh, we could just go and watch the video from last week if you guys want. We just press play on last week's. It's only an hour long. That would give us 2 hours and 10 minutes.
We could critique Tim's critique.
Yes.
Yeah,
that
would be fun.
Not going to happen. How about disillusioned theist turned deist seeking answers?
Yes, let's listen to that call.
Listen up, Wilkes-Barre.
Another commercial. They're making money off us.
I wonder where you live, Tim.
I don't know.
It seems like Google knows.
My new book, Millionaire Success Habits, is on.
If this were 20 years ago when I was a devout Christian calling into an atheist show, the power outage that cut my call here, I would have thought that was a sign from God that I needed to turn away from and talking to an atheist. But I now know it's just my crappy phone company and their bad phone line.
Well, good. That's a step. So you're confused. You believe in an entity, but nothing supernatural, and you don't have anyone to speak with locally. It just sounds like you're in a space where you're checking ideas.
Yeah, and I know there's not a lot of time left in the show, so
it's okay.
I'll be kind of brief. I've had about a 45 to 50 year, more 50 or 55 year spiritual journey. And it started out in a home where we just accepted the belief in God and the Bible, although we didn't go to church. So from my youngest times, everybody just believed in the Bible. Everyone I knew, this was, back in the early 60s. And I didn't even know the concept of an atheist. And then as atheism. And when I became a teenager, I was searching. I was a hippie kid, so peace and love was very important. Jesus seemed to be part of that, and I became a born-again Christian, although I didn't actually have the experience that everyone else did in the revival, where I became born again, but I kept that to myself. And I never, all of the the singing and the hallelujah and the elation never resonated with me. I was searching for something more rational. And so before I became an adult,
Can we talk a little bit about experiences, conversion experiences? I don't know.
Sure.
You guys want to do that? Expound a little bit about
Well, I thought it was interesting that he's talking about that he was a born again Christian, but he admits that he was never born again. But it sounds like he was also part of a very experienced, as you mentioned, experience-oriented form of Christianity, where it was a lot of emotional driven. He didn't understand why people are singing hallelujah and things like that. But I tell you what, once you, and just for anyone out there, we want to talk about the gospel here and how it changes your life. And as a Christian, I don't sing hallelujah because it gives me a feeling of euphoria. I sing praises to the Lord because He has saved me, and that is a significant impact on my life. And it just comes out of the heart of a Christian to desire to worship and give praise to God for what He has done, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so when we gather together as a church, we're not doing it to have a worship experience. One thing that really drives me crazy is a lot of Christians talk about, well, I like going to this church because it has a great worship experience. That's not why I worship the Lord. I worship God because He is worthy of praise, and that is why I lift up my voice and sing to Him. And so it sounds like this guy has a background in a more experiential form of Christianity instead of one that is based upon objective truth and a faith and a trust that God has saved me, and because of that I worship Him and I praise Him.
And he was talking about not only as his Christian life, but also in his conversion experience. He didn't have an experience like other people.
Yeah.
And there are some people who have these really would you say it? Like these real life-changing moments when God saves them. Times when all of the sudden they feel that, all of a sudden it's like this heavy weight of sin, and then it's gone. And, it's the moment in their life when they repented and trusted Christ. But other people, they don't have a traumatic experience like that. It's more of a understanding of what the gospel is and submitting yourself to it and believing the truths of the gospel. And they don't have that. So how much weight should we have on how much should we rely on those experiences, or be concerned that we didn't have an experience that was traumatic like that? Like some people, we've heard people on this podcast come on and give a testimony of, well, I don't even know when I was saved. I don't even know when it happened. But I can tell you, as soon as I heard the gospel, as soon as I understood it, I believed it to be true.
Well, I think all Christians experience the gospel, some in different ways, but all experience the fact that the objective truth that they come to realize that that's what faith is grasping a hold of the fact that Christ died for me. If a person is a professing Christian and they have not experienced that, I'm not talking about a big emotional thing where you talked about earlier, where you feel the weight of sin fall off your shoulders and things like that. But still experience the fact that, I mean, I know, for example, I know the general time when I was saved. I don't know the exact day, but I know when it happened. I can't tell you what day it was in the week, but I do know when it happened. But what changed for me was the way that, so prior to my salvation experience, I would sing music. I would have sometimes worship experiences, things like that. I would sing songs to the Lord, but I didn't connect with the words. Now, post salvation, you have a connection with those things. They're deeply personal, and you resonate with what the songwriter is speaking about. And so, all Christians, I believe, that have experienced the gospel have that sort of experience. But not all Christians have this dramatic life change. Sometimes God changes a person more gradually, but all Christians experience the gospel to one degree or another, or they're not a Christian. But it's not the emotional experience that is in a lot of modern worship, where they get caught up in the euphoria of singing music and things like that. That's not experiencing the gospel. Experiencing the gospel is a recognition that Christ has saved me from my sins, and then a desire to worship God as a result of that. Not a feeling of euphoria because of the music.
Mm.
And I think that that's probably what he was more a part of.
Yeah.
Is probably people that had those type of experiences, and you see that a lot among the more charismatic wings of Christianity.
Alrighty.
Became a joiner to the Jehovah's Witness faith.
Oh, wow.
And because of some literature they presented, seemed very rational, and I went to their church. It was very calm and rational. And this was, of course, pre-internet days, and you could get no information about the group. And I remained as a very devout member of their group for probably almost 30 years, raising a family in there, until a horrible situation in my life led me to abandon that group. And even though I had a very bad experience within the group, including preparation for suicide about halfway through my tenure as one of their members, I remained faithful and to the concept of God and the Bible. Well, since that, I'll kind of summarize up. Since that time, I've come to understand the Bible for what it is, just simply myths, and through learning in history and evolution and things, I think I've come to a fairly rational understanding of things. But there's still this thing that lingers in me, that there might be or probably is a God, even though I don't believe that it's any sort of an anthropomorphic being that has anything to do with humanity as far as what humans are doing. So I guess my question is, how do I move forward? I think maybe this is a socialization or a cultural thing. How do I move forward and kind of get past that and shake that belief, if my question makes sense?
Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I think it's just you're going through a process of figuring out what makes sense and discarding the stuff that doesn't. And I'm not surprised. It's a pretty common experience that you want to hang on to a little bit of something as you go through that. And I think in time, as you examine things, you may give that up as well, if it doesn't serve you in what you're examining. So as far as process, I think just do more of what you've been doing the last. I don't recall now how many years this process
since you've been investigating.
5 years.
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah, is when I've been trying to become educated about the world and theology and history and evolution, and that's what's really helped me. I never had any higher education when I was younger, and so your basic high school education from the 60s and 70s doesn't really prepare you for any deep thinking.
And I would just say, examine what it is that still makes you think that there's something out there in whatever form you currently understand it to be, and just test that. Does that make sense? What would it mean?
Yeah.
What would it mean if there wasn't?
Well, I guess that's the part that I'm kind of drawn to is the way you're describing, let's just for now call it God, right? How you're describing this thing. Because John is saying, what makes you think that it's out there, right? Like he's not asking, but he's saying that might be something to examine. What makes you think that it's out there? And I'm looking at it like, I don't even know what you think is out there, right? Because what you've described is a thing without will or personality or any kind of discernment, any sort of personage. And it has absolutely nothing to do with human.
What you've described is an idol. You've made up something to suit your own needs and desires.
Well, and it's pretty obvious. This man, it's clear. 1 John, is it 1:19? It says, "Those that went out from us were never of us. For had they been with us, they would have remained with us."
Right.
I'm just reminded of Romans 8:35. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine, nakedness, danger or sword separate us? And obviously it's a rhetorical question by the apostle, that none of those things shall separate us from the love of Christ. So this man, my heart goes out to him, never experienced the love of Christ. Because had he experienced the love of Christ, the tribulation and the difficulty in his life, which he referred to, would not have separated him. Those things do not separate Christians from Christ. They cause Christians to turn to Christ and depend upon him even more, and recognize that there's no charge that's ever going to be brought against them, because it is God who justifies. And so this man has not experienced and never did experience the love of Christ, or else this would not have separated him from that supposed profession that he had made. And it looks like he was part of a cult who has a false view of God, and a false God cannot save. And so that's why this man has never experienced salvation. And so he is part of the religiously, you can maybe say, abused or part of the great crowd of those who have been disenfranchised with religion as a whole. And he's now, I guess, dancing with some form of deism, it seems like. But, this is where we as Christians need to share that gospel, because maybe this man has never really even heard the true gospel of the triune God of Scripture. Instead has only ever been faced with an aberration of Christianity and a false cult.
Have you ever known, and this is a little aside, but have you ever known anybody in your personal life or social media, YouTube personalities, etc., who had at one time claimed faith in Christ of some Protestant denomination? I'm not talking Arminian, Calvinist, doesn't matter. But have you ever known anyone who held to a Protestant statement of faith of any type and then went apostate, denied their faith, and then went back to repent and see the errors of their ways? Have you? Because I can only think of one.
I can't think of anyone.
I can think of one. It's probably the same one that you're thinking of.
Yeah, probably. And the apostasy, I think, lasted 2 weeks, if I remember the story correctly.
No, I'm thinking of those couple of the girls on YouTube. They went full preterist to atheist, and then they were atheists for a long time.
A couple of years. I didn't know that they
and they came back.
Oh, interesting. I don't know why that question popped to mind. I was just thinking of that as I was listening to this person and considering, like, well, this person, I don't know. Anyhow, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, God can save this guy at anytime he wants to. There still is hope for this guy. I mean, it seems that he's already over the cliff, and naturally he's going to be an atheist in a in a short time span. But God can still save him. We can still look for that to happen and pray that somebody shares the gospel with Jacob, and God grants him faith and repentance.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, and you summarize that well, because I don't believe there's an afterlife. I don't believe we have a spirit or a soul. I think that when we die, that's the end of things.
Right. But I'm saying John is kind of asking the question, what makes you believe in this thing? And I'm asking the question, is it a thing? No, but
Yeah, is it even a thing?
Is what you're describing a thing? Is it anything? Because what it sounds like is you're describing nothing. What is the difference between a universe that includes a non-personal thing that has no effect on anything and a universe with no God?
For a second. The one thing that I want people to pay attention to is where this man said, well, I think that this is how reality is. And then he, lists off a long set of things. He doesn't believe in the afterlife, doesn't believe, all those things. These are the things that he thinks are true about reality. My question to him simply is how does he know those things are true about reality? I know that he assumes and thinks that they are, but he talks about he's being more rational, and I think he's just substituting rationalism for he's adopted naturalism. But why does he believe naturalism is true? Why does he believe those things that he thinks now? Why does he think they are true? How does he know that that's the truth about reality?
Okay, that's a really good way to that's a good way to think about it.
Is this thing that you just described anything? Because it sounds to me like the same as a no thing, as a non-existent thing.
Is anything explained by the existence of this thing that can't be explained otherwise?
Now we sound like that non-stamp collector thing. Is the thing that caused the other things that didn't. Yeah, I don't even know that what you're describing would be exist in some way existing, like that it would be a description of an existent item.
Kind of like, what is it that would make that even a thing, or a thing that you would call God?
Right.
Yeah, because it's almost like saying, I still think there's a God, but I think it's sort of invisible, and it doesn't really have any kind of thoughts or personality, and it has no manifestations, and it really doesn't take up space, and it's not necessarily bound by time, and at a certain point, it's like, does it have any attributes that would make it quantifiable, that would make it be part of the category of existent? Because if not, I think you're already at a point where it doesn't exist in your head.
That, the way you just put that is very helpful, because if something is a thing, it has to have attributes.
Right, and you're describing non-attributes. You're saying it's not this, it's not this, exactly.
It's not. Don't you think this man is like in the process of Romans chapter 1, right? He's decided to rebel against God. He's decided that the scriptures aren't true, and that the Christian God doesn't exist. So he's created a God of his own liking, and eventually God's going to turn him over to his wickedness, his turning away from God, and he'll eventually just convince himself that there is no God. They're shaking their heads. Those of you know watching the video.
Not this, and if it's not everything, and there isn't anything that it is, right? I mean, isn't that what existence, quote, is that you are in some way, and you're describing a thing that's not in many ways, but you haven't said why it is, or what it is, or how it is.
It's almost like the way you're putting that is very helpful. It's almost like, well, there are mysteries to us about our universe. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there are mysteries or things that are unknown doesn't necessarily give a rationale that there is something specifically identifiable out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually very helpful. I have a lot of friends that are all of my friends are all spiritual. They are not. Most of them aren't Christian, and this is a very difficult topic to talk about. It's something that I haven't ever had a chance to bounce an idea off someone. So I really appreciate you listening to my question.
Yeah. All right. It's 10 o'clock. Any thoughts on that? You guys, are you guys with me? We should wrap it up. We've been going for an hour and a half, or
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
There's only so much I can take.
Uh-oh.
I have a lot of respect for people like Chris Roseborough and you, Tim, who can sit through the teachings of atheists and in Chris Roseborough's case is like these wacko charismatics and pick it apart. I get exhausted mentally. There's points where I have to physically force myself to focus to keep myself from tuning out. But I don't know if I was successful in that tonight.
I do see you zoning out. I see you zoning out.
Sorry.
All right. You've been listening to the Atheist Experience, a podcast brought to you on the Bible Thumping Wingnet Network. And reading some comments. Go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com for everything Bible Thumping Wingnut. We usually do this every Sunday night live, somewhere between 8 and 10 p.m. Eastern time. And you can check us out live. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. Connect with us on Facebook. All that stuff. Jason Mullet, Logical Belief Ministries. You have a lot of really good content people can take advantage of.
Yeah, and I need to start putting more content out there again. I do have a series on apologetics and evangelism that I've done at my church. I did post it on my own channel, but I need to get back on the horse. But there's a couple, personal things that we need to get worked out here. But God is good, and He's faithful through it all, and He's been so good. And so there's not really anything that I can complain about.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and I know you'll be on again, Lord willing. And till next time, thanks everybody for watching on YouTube and for listening on the podcast feed. And that is it. Take care and God bless.